let me say, a word in defense of reason in dialogue with faith.
Because faith is that proof. Faith unites us to that substance.
But reason, in order to realize its full potential, needs the horizons revealed by and truths contained in the faith. And not just any faith, but the Catholic faith.
It's really wonderful to be here in this wonderful, incredible Catholic university. I commend all of you for having such an institution. I'm very proud to be Catholic for being here at Franciscan. A few years ago, my wife and I were awakened in the middle of the night by a loud thumping on our door. We rushed out to find out the meaning of the commotion, only to discover a teen girl of about 13 years of age, heavily leaning against the door and crying. We helped her in, only to discover that this girl had been taking care of her 3 little siblings for 3 months, all by herself, because her mother was somewhere out there rampaging on drugs. From time to time, the mother will come back to the home for some fading moments, only to disappear again like a ghost into the darkness and the shadows of the drug underworld, leaving behind a family in disarray. You can imagine the desperation of a 13-year-old girl having to deal with this dark situation. You can understand why in that fated night she came to our home. I think it was to pretend that she was only living a dream, a bad dream, from which one day she will awake to a life of plenty, but that wasn't the case. Soon she went back to face again the dark reality of that situation. Her mother, as I said, from time to time, she will come back, come and go, but never in a stable reality for her. Well, I can tell you today that same young girl that many times even attempted suicide is a wonderful mother, graduated as a nurse, and joined the board of directors of our organization 3 years ago to try to help others. It is as if among the ashes of a broken existence, she found herself invested with a strength that was unfamiliar to her, a strength that can only come from God, a strength that helped her change her life. Her mother has remarkably recovered. Yes, she is still fighting the demons of drug addiction, but she's back in the home, taking care of her children, and even in the community trying to help others. What I realized on that day is that the human person has the capacity to change, and we must demand personal responsibility from every person. Every time we do that and we challenge people to change, we highlight their dignity. We treat people like full human beings. And when we fail to do that, we hurt people. And I don't care what we do for them, we hurt them. Every day, my friends, the drama of the meaning of the human condition unfolds before our eyes. And each one of you is challenged to find an answer to that drama. You cannot transfer that responsibility to anyone. You cannot transfer that responsibility to definitely not to government, not even to the church. Each one of us is called to answer personally to the drama of the hurting lives of so many people in the world. The human person is the answer to the problems of existence. However, I'm not always taught this way. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. I grew up in Puerto Rico in the 1960s, as David said, in a communist household. My father was founding member of the Socialist Party of Puerto Rico. He was there in 1959 with 12 other men when they started the Movimiento Pro Independencia, the movement for independence that later became the Marxist-Leninist Socialist Party of Puerto Rico. He told us that America was the enemy of humanity and I was responsible to destroy this country and capitalism. He used to gather the 4 children, my siblings and I to listen to Fidel Castro never-ending speeches. and he used to tell us, you know, this is your task in life, to destroy America. I never forget the night that I saw my mother crying, and she went out of the home to talk with two men who were always there in the car in front of our home. And she was very agitated. I later discovered that these were FBI agents who were always in front of our home checking on my father. And I hated them. I associated America and everything that had to do with America with everything that was wrong in our family. I cannot even remember any kind of tenderness between my parents. In fact, the only one time that I remember any kind of tenderness between them was when the Soviets defeated the Americans in the 1972 Olympic Games in basketball. I remember them dancing. I still can taste the satisfaction, and I can hardly control the emotion of that moment. I blame America for everything, even though socialism destroyed their marriage. And that was the kind of life I lived. I brought with me here, this is my father's FBI file, and it relates 45 years of communist activity since from them I was not even born in 1959. And let me read to you what was my father's belief, just if I can find the page, and translate it from the Spanish. And where he eloquently tells me and tells the world what is his belief about society. He said, proletarian class struggle is the foundation that will bring about the collapse of the capitalist institution. The function of our Workers' Party is to expand this struggle from the present economic phase to a political phase. That is, a shift from claiming rights against particular corporations and capitalist bosses into a war against the whole system, claiming profound economic, social, and political transformations. And that was my belief. I strongly believe that the entire of the social system collapses into the institutions and the affairs of the state, and that one day we will redeem the world. We will bring about heaven on earth. That is the kind of system. At the same time, my mother was, well, whatever my father was. 1960s women were in the Latin America were in a sense subservient to their fathers, to their husbands, but she had some faith. So she would sneak me with friends to go to mass from time to time without my father knowing, because it was not supposed to be. You are the wife of a committed Marxist. This thing about God is just a charade of the capitalists that keep you thinking about heaven while they have a good time here on earth. That's exactly what he used to believe. So I began to develop a kind of double consciousness. On the one side, my true religion, which was socialism. Imagine, my father is a socialist. I remember going to the communist cells with him. Well, I go to sleep every time because it was so boring. But that was my identity. And at the same time, I would go to mass from time to time, and I had begun to develop this question about God. Is that true? Is there a God really? So I began to develop that double consciousness, and I tried to merge both of them. And what was a good Catholic communist boy in 1980s Puerto Rico? Well, I joined the Jesuit order, of course. When I went to college, I left college, and I joined the Jesuit order because they were all a bunch of Marxists. We're talking about the early 1980s in Puerto Rico. So I was always absolutely sure that the Jesuits in Puerto Rico were socialists. I wasn't always sure if they believed in God or not, but they were surely socialists. Why I did that? Because I was in love with liberation theology. This is the time of liberation theology in Central America. And they used to send us to Nicaragua to study philosophy. So I was looking forward to finish my first years of novitiate and go to study philosophy under the great liberation theologian scholars. Ignacio Ellacuría, Juan Luis II, Gustavo Gutierrez. All of these men were living there, right there in the border between El Salvador and Nicaragua, and I was going to be taught by these great men. Interestingly, my father, who was a Marxist and a non-believer, was thrilled that I joined the Jesuit order because he knew that they were all socialists, and his son was going to Nicaragua under the Sandinista government. But something happened that you're too young to remember. But the older guys here probably remember when the 7 Jesuits were murdered in El Salvador, right there in the border with Nicaragua. I was going to go and live precisely in that home. Out of concern for our safety, they decided not to send us to Nicaragua, and I was frustrated. And I quit seminary immediately. I went back home because I did not have a vocation to the priesthood. I just wanted to play the revolutionary priest, go to Nicaragua, get a good education paid by the church, and then undermine the church and undermine capitalism from the inside out. And at that moment in my life, I made a big mistake as a socialist, a mistake for which I will always be grateful. I came to the guts of the monster, as we used to call America. We used to call this is the guts of the monster. So I decided to do my master's degree in political science and come to America. And I came to study at the University of Southern Mississippi, of all places. So I decided to come to deep south in the United States to study political science. And I always say that when I step outside of that plane, afraid, and really nervous about my encounter with America, my lungs were filled with the breath of true freedom. I did not know that at the time, but that is exactly what happened to me. I came to America, and America taught me something that I didn't think existed. I began to, for the first time in my life, confront the ideology of socialism. I have learned very well how to articulate that theory. I could tell you about Marxism very, very well, but I had never challenged its assumptions. Those assumptions were for me true. And for the first time, the reality of my encounter with America began to question those assumptions. In the beginning, it was subtle, but eventually it created a great crisis in my life. My identity was tied to socialism. My father's life had been a socialist life. Again, my father's life was totally committed to socialism, so much that he was willing to destroy his marriage as long as he could become a revolutionary. 2 things I learned that began to impact me. The first thing I learned is that America taught me a connection between reward and accomplishment. I did not think that existed, that could exist in the United States. I had good grades in my first semester in college, and one day they called me to the dean's office and offered me a full assistantship, only because I had succeeded. Paid me all my studies, gave me money to spend, my books, everything was paid simply because the professor saw in me something and decided to reward that. And I said, I hate these people's guts, and they're rewarding me. For the first time I began to see, America does have this connection between reward and accomplishment. And I say this because I think that many times we forget that when we are trying to help the poor. We sever that relationship between reward and accomplishment, and we hurt people trying to help them. But America taught me that. Number 2, is this what do you call poverty in America? I began to see that what you call poverty in America is really a joke. You go to other countries in the world, and what you call poverty here is middle-class status easily. In fact, the poor in America have more or less the same middle status of European countries. And we still call that poverty. So my confronting the reality of poverty in America with the reality of poverty in Puerto Rico, from where I was coming from. And I was supposed to go to the guts of the monster and find devastation. And I did not find that. And the third thing I found was that even in the deep south of the United States, most people were decent and good. They went out of their way to try to help me. Even these evil white people that I thought that were going to kill me and lynch me or something like that in the deep south in Mississippi were decent, good people. I used to believe as a black person, Hispanic, thinking that what was our problem in our community? Well, our problem were you white people are our problem. You fix yourselves and we'll be whole. I didn't realize that I was perpetuating the idea of slavery. Because isn't slavery when we place our faith in the hands of another? Even if it's true that someone else has responsibility, when you displace that kind of power from your own hands, you become a slave in your mind. So I began to have that kind of encounter with the reality of America, and that disturbed me. Disturbed me because I was not supposed to be thinking these things. I wasn't supposed, I'm a revolutionary. My father is a revolutionary. You know, socialism is not a rational theory. It is a vision of the world more than anything. Before it becomes a theory that you can rationally explain, it's more like a pair of glasses you put on yourself. It's a prism through which you look at reality, and then you interpret reality through those glasses. And it's so hard to change your prescribed glasses. It's really an emotional attachment to the idea that I can change the world through my action. And I had to surrender the idea of that expansive capacity of the human person to change things. I had to stop being a utopian that believed that, I can change the world. I can't. And that was not easy. But eventually, I changed my mind about America. I began to not only question the ideas of socialism, but I began to read what I wasn't supposed to be reading. You don't read that Yankee propaganda, my father used to say. You stay away from that founding fathers and all these other writers. I began to, for the first time, read, and then I read myself into more love for America. But in the beginning, was really an encounter with a reality that wasn't supposed to be there. We created great problems, again, because my father couldn't understand it. And he died a good communist, and our relationship was never the same. So it cost me greatly to change. But before he died, my father told me something. So he said, Ismael, I don't understand why you have chosen the path you have chosen. But don't ever be a fence sitter. Stand on what you believe. Stand in your convictions. Do not really give way to trying to benefit yourself and be whatever others say because it benefits you. Stand on those principles. And to this day is something that I am grateful to my father because he lived that life. What he believed, he defended with his life. And I buried my father, and I sang again the revolutionary songs, and I pumped my fist again in his memory at his funeral. But I today wave a different flag, the flag of freedom, the flag of liberty, because he told me to do it. If you believe in those convictions, stand on those convictions. And that I tell you because America is losing its grip, it's losing its spirit. Interestingly, as I come to America at great price, personal price, to end the life of socialism, I see many Americans bored in affluence, turning their way and their backs on freedom and going exactly in the direction I was abandoning. I come to America and begin to work in the church, and even in the church I begin to see many of the assumptions of socialism alive and well under the guise of social justice. And that's what many times happens in our church, unfortunately. We have really surrendered certain principles, again, because we are so wealthy. And only people who are so wealthy can start thinking about things like that. You know, start thinking about, well, we should not have so much. Well, you can say that because you have. I used to say, you know, I was, for a moment, one of the luckiest socialists on earth because I lived in America where I could think like a socialist. I just didn't have to live like a socialist. And that's exactly what's happening in America. We live the life of capitalism, so it's so cool to play the socialist play. And I began to work in the minority community, in the black community, for 20 years in Catholic ministry, seeing that I am not well received suddenly. I wasn't well received because I had abandoned certain ideas and I have rejected the ideas of socialism, and many times that was rejected in the church. And after 15 years working in the minority community, I decided that there has to be a change in the way that we see social justice. There has to be a renewal of the way we work with the poor. And that's when I decided to leave the ministry in the church to begin the Freedom and Virtue Institute. I make that decision out of a real dissatisfaction in the way we work with the poor. What we do sometimes with the poor? Well, a poor person comes, we pack a bag of stuff, you know, a bag of food, we give it to the poor person, and we feel good about ourselves. It's all about how we feel about the exercise. It makes us feel good about ourselves. We don't really think about what we are doing for that person. And I began to see that families will come to get stuff from us at the Catholic Center, and in 10 years I was seeing their children coming for stuff. What have I done but keep them in poverty but more or less well fed? That's what I had done. I have become a poverty manager. I manage people's poverty. I keep them well fed but in poverty. I feel good about ourselves. And that is the way sometimes we treat the poor. We don't see them as full human beings. Sometimes we treat the poor as dogs. You know, you have a dog, you place a bowl of food there, and he comes every time for his food. But we are more than dogs. We are human beings made in the image and likeness of God with the capacity, the moral capacity of self-realization. We can make choices. We have dignity. We have the image of God, which means that we have the capacity of reasoning, you know, to know the truth, and will to do the good. We can know the truth and do the good. And when you actualize that capacity, and when you challenge people to actualize that capacity, that is compassion. When you substitute that by giving stuff away to people, because it makes you feel good, you're hurting people and you're degrading people. You know, we had to start going from the heart to the brain and then to the muscle. You know what many times we do? We go from the heart straight to the muscle. You know, we feel sorry for people and we give stuff away. And that's what we do. Sometimes we don't sit down and wait for a second to think what is the most intelligent way to help the poor. To discover what Pope John Paul II called the deeper human need. And that need cannot be discerned simply by listening to what people tell you they need. We have to take a step back and find ways to really highlight the dignity of people. And I'm going to give you 7 principles that have served me to understand well what authentic Catholic social justice is and how we can help people the right way. The first one is that every person is unique and unrepeatable. Every person is unique and unrepeatable. Sometimes we talk about rich people, poor people, black people, white people. That doesn't mean anything. Absolutely nothing. White people, sometimes people ask me, white people think this way. I don't know how white people think. If I get to know you as a person, I get to know how you think. In my case, I don't know how black people or Hispanics think. I know how I think. I have a daughter. My wife is African American from South Side of Chicago, conservative Catholic from South Side of Chicago, a rare bird. But we have a daughter, so she is covered. I tell you, her father is Hispanic black, mother is African American, and she's a female, so she's covered under affirmative action anywhere you look at it. But she graduated from college from high school just recently with very good grades, and she's applying for college now. And we made an agreement. We said, when the applications for college are coming and they ask you what is your race, what you're going to write there is none of your business. It's none of anybody's business what her race is. That has absolutely nothing to do with her going or not going to college. In America, what we have done is we have boxed people into these meaningless labels. And we have gone, the pendulum of race consciousness has swung from exclusion because of race, evil exclusion because of race, all the way to inclusion because of race, degrading inclusion because of race. And in the meantime, we have forgotten about the human person in front of us. We talk about inclusion and diversity, and what they do is how many black people we need to count to get the quota of blacks in our organization, in our college. And we forget about that person. She went to the University of Florida, supposedly in a scholars event. She was invited, and she was so happy to go there as a scholar. She's invited to a good university. She graduated for 4.17 GPA, a very good student. When she goes there, every round was black and brown. I said, man, this is a very funny university. All the scholars are only black and brown, And she realized that it was a gimmick to bring minorities to the college under the diversity, as scholars, to get them to go into the university so they can meet their quota of blacks. In other words, she became invisible as a person. They did not see her as a person. They did not see Ismael Hernandez. They saw another black kid to meet our quota. That is degrading. That is not the way to respect people. So every person is unique and irrepeatable. There's no such thing as black, white, poor, and rich. Those are labels we create to try to gain power over the minds of people. Race and class do not define us in the absolute. We are persons made in the image and likeness of God. So when you go and work with the poor, you go and work with Jose Perez or Mary Richmond, with one person at a time, respecting the uniqueness of that person. Number 2, resist the lure of victimization. We have created in America families in perpetual crisis. Crisis is what defines their existence. This is what we have done in America. A man was walking down the street, eating a sandwich, minding his business, and he looks to the side of the road and he sees a person who is hungry. And moved to compassion, that person takes his sandwich, deprives himself of his own property, and gives it to the poor person. That is true encounter. I exercised my freedom, deprived myself of what is mine, and I voluntarily gave it to someone for no other reason but because I think it's the right thing. That is true community. Two individuals who are simply strangers a moment ago, suddenly they are brothers, united by a bond of common humanity, respecting each other. The person who gave will do it again because he knows it's true, it's good, and not only makes him feel good, he knows it's the right thing to do. It costs him to do it, but he will do it again. The person who received the property feels tremendous gratitude. This guy didn't have to give me what was his. Maybe I changed my life and I do it the same. I pass it forward to someone else. He has shown me the way when something good happens to me. It's a way to change my life so I can help one another. Well, what we have done in America, I'm walking down the street, minding my business, eating my sandwich, and I look to the side of the road, and there's a poor person, hungry. And before I can do anything, here comes the government commissar running down the streets, snatches the sandwich from my hands, and gives it to the poor person. What we have now, we don't have encounter anymore. What we have, tension and class struggle. The person who saw his property confiscated is angry and resentful. Why my property had to be taken from me and given to someone else? Why you made decisions about my property and not myself? So I grudgingly, at the end of the year, I pay my taxes to help, quote unquote, help the poor, and don't come back to me for something else. What I'm going to do from now on is I'm going to protect my property from you. And then those people, you see, before were my brother whom I voluntarily helped. Suddenly, my brother becomes those people you gave the money to. Those people you gave the property to. And the poor feels no gratitude. But I had to say thank you to you. The good and wonderful commissar gave it to me. It belongs to me. It's mine. And you expect me to eat this sandwich without a drink? Go back to the same guy from whom you took the sandwich and take more from him. So you see, the gift becomes an entitlement, a never sufficient entitlement. Are we going to get into that mess? Are we going to, as Christians, get into that system of degradation? Which one? We as Catholics have to make a decision. Who are we going to be? That's what I am against, the church taking government money to run our ministries. What are we? Faith-filled helpers of others, or we are the hard hand of the state? Are we faith-filled communities of compassion or bureaucrats of compassion? I have seen it because I have seen it in the minority community. We get all this money from the government, and then whose hands are rocking that cradle? Are not the bishops, it's the government. What happens? Half of your staff now knows that their job depends on government coming with money. Who do you think are going to give their allegiance to? To our faith or to the one who brings the bacon in so I can have a job? And that is not helping the poor. That is perpetuating a system of degradation of the poor, and it's changing the internal culture of ministries, because the bureaucracies of government bring ways of looking at the problems of poverty into the church that are different from what our faith tells us that to help the poor is supposed to be. So we need to resist to make people victims of forces, and we become the distributors of stuff. That is not our task. We live now in an age of alibi. I'm always pointing the finger at others for the problems in my life. No, if I have a bad life with my mom and my dad, my teacher looked me the wrong way. You know, the government is oppressing me. Let's change the government. You know, the government has become like an idol that we worship and hate at the same time. We hate the government, but we still go back to the government, trying to have the government save us from our condition. The second one was resist the lure of victimhood. The third one is diminish the presence, again, of the state and of bureaucracies in trying to help the poor. Why bureaucracies don't work? Can you tell me? Yes.
Because they become so bloated, it's just all these layers
Absolutely. In fact, about 70 cents of every dollar that goes to the government to help the poor never reaches the hands of the poor. 70 cents of every dollar that goes to the government is eaten up by the bureaucracies of government. So you take the money from my pocket, you create a bureaucracy here that has to be sustained, and then something trickles down eventually to the poor. Number two, bureaucracies do not see you as a human person. Go to a welfare office. What's your name? Social security number, not even your name. Here's your number, here's your check. And bureaucracies reward need. The less you make, the greater the reward. So what are you incentivizing then? Poverty. If you get more money for being more poor, you are incentivizing poverty. And then when the nonprofits and the church get more money to help the poor, what happens? We are invested in the very problem we are trying to fix. If poverty brings the money in, what do I want? I want more poverty, not less. If there are more poor people in my area and you give me more money to attend the poor, I need to increase my budget. What do I need? I need more poor people, not less. So I'm invested in the very problem I'm supposed to be there to solve, which should be the opposite. So bureaucracies increase the problem because the problem is what increases the power of bureaucracies. So when you diminish the power of bureaucratic systems in the lives of people, you begin to find ways to authentically help the poor. We had to be wise about it. Number one, the problems of poverty are not about lack of money. There are deeper problems than that. I define poverty in America as the relentless appetite for comfort acquired without effort and leading us into vice and sin. That is what is poverty in a society of opportunities. The relentless appetite for comfort acquired without effort and leading us into vice and sin. I have a good friend who is from Liberia. He came here as a refugee from the Liberian Civil War, where all his family were murdered simply because his family were Mandingos. And they were killing all who belonged to that tribe. By the grace of God, he came to America, and he told me, Ismael, you in America don't know what poverty is. You know, I mean, in my country, this thing about picking up your garbage, that doesn't exist. Mail delivered to your home. I live in a kind of poverty that I had never seen. And you know what happened? I was always on time. To any situation in Liberia, I had to walk miles. Sometimes to go to church, I had to go walk miles to try to get a job. I come to America, I get a car, I start getting a good life, and suddenly I'm never on time to anything I go to. There was a transformation in his psyche. That tells us that poverty in America is really a spiritual condition more than a situation where people lack their resources. If you compare, let me give you the statistics on poverty according to the census, the 2000 census. 80% of poor households in America have air conditioning. By contrast, in 1970, only 36% of all households in America had air conditioning, of all households, including rich and poor. Today, 80% of households that are poor have air conditioning. Fully 92% of poor households have a microwave, 2/3 have at least one DVD player, and 70% have a VCR. Nearly 75% have a car or a truck. 31% have 2 cars or 2 trucks. 4 out of 5 poor adults were never hungry at any time in the prior year. 4 of every 5. due to lack of money or food. Think about that. Most poor people in America are not hungry. The problem is that many of us who work in minority communities or poor communities, sometimes we are in contact with the poorest of the poor. And sometimes that gives us a sense that that's the face of poverty. Because many times we are dealing with the worst of the worst situations. And we think that that is the reality for most poor people. Not only that, poor people are counted very funny in America. They only count wages. You have to have someone reporting wages on you to be counted as poor. There are millions of people who are retired or who have investments, and no one is reporting wages on them, and they are counted in the statistics of poverty, even though they live middle-class status lives. So that's the way we and the disbursements from the government for poor families are not counted in the statistics of poverty. And around a family of 4 receives about $12,000 in benefits from government. That is not counted in the statistics of poverty. So the way we count the poor also gives us a skewed reality of poverty. We are told that there are 46 million people who are poor in America. Well, how many of them are in entrenched poverty? A poverty from which they cannot escape, about 5% of those 46 million. And there have been about 5 different studies that tell us that the poor in America stay in poverty about 8 years. Between 65 to 85% of poor people who have been counted in year 1 were no longer poor 8 years after that date. That means that America continues to be a mobile society where you are poor today, but you have the opportunity to escape that poverty. In a society of opportunity, we have to look at poverty in a way that is very different than a society where there are absolutely no opportunities. Nearly 2/3 have cable TV or satellite TV. 2/3 of poor families have, 50% have a personal computer. More than half of poor families with children have a video game system, such as an Xbox or a PlayStation. Just under half of poor people have internet access. 1/3 have a widescreen plasma or LCD TV, and 1 in every 4 has a digital video recorder, such as TiVo. That is the face of poverty in America. Compare that with the poverty in many other countries. Yes, there are people who suffer, but wouldn't it be better to narrow our resources to that 5% that is in entrenched poverty? Can you imagine the amount of resources we will have as a nation if we could take all 1/3 of the resources we place on the poor today and narrow it to those who are really, really poor, to really help them? But this has become a political exercise because, again, poverty is power in America, and politicians know that. Power. If I'm a politician and I go to you and say, we're going to work very hard together. I don't promise you anything, but we are going to make it. We're going to be working hard. And then here comes the other politician and says, here's the check. Who is going to get the vote? The guy who comes with the check in hand, and at the expense of the dignity of persons. Number 4, there are no comprehensive solutions. No comprehensive solutions. In other words, we should not be utopians. There are no comprehensive solutions to the problems of poverty. One person at a time, do what you can to help that person in a dignified way by avoiding dependency, challenging that person to have a better life, and being there with the one who suffers. That is what compassion means. In fact, in the Greek, it means exactly that. Being there with the one who suffers. As you journey in life, it's your life and it's your responsibility, not mine. I will be there side by side you. And when I see you weak need and going down, then I calm you and I hold you, I help you, I love you, and then I let you go again. It's your life, it's your responsibility. I believe in you. I'll be there with you as you journey that walk that no one else can do for you. So the programs that we should create are, number one, simple, practical, meaningful, measurable, and replicable. Let me give you a story. We have in our institute a club we call the Self-Reliance Club. 2 years ago, I turned on the TV, and I see a sea of black and brown kids getting the cheap, free stuff, school supplies. You know, from where? From whom? A bunch of white people, impersonal people. They don't know them, and they are killing each other for getting the cheap, free stuff. And they were praising it, and I felt degraded. I felt upset about it. Number one, why is always us at the receiving end of this exercise? We have what they have. We have what it takes to get out of poverty on our own. But it's an exercise of power. Again, those who give the stuff away feel good about themselves. It feels good to give these black kids stuff. But think about it. Those who have children, do you give stuff to your children every time they come for stuff? No, we don't do that. Why is that? Because we know it's not good for them. We know it's not good for them. Well, why you do that to the children of the poor then? You don't do that to those who you love the most, which are your children. You don't always give them. You challenge them. You make them work for stuff sometimes. You place chores and you do things that are not always giving and giving and giving because you know it's good for them. Why not do the same with the children of the poor? Many times in our churches, what we do, the Christmas is coming, and we place a Christmas tree in the back, no? With a piece of paper with a name. You grab the piece, you bring the bike, and that's it. And we call that compassion. That's a substitute for compassion that relieve your conscience, because probably you didn't do enough during the year for other people. You didn't know that child. You don't want to know that child. But makes you feel good about bringing the brand new bike. And what happens? That brand new bike goes to a family where daddy cannot bring a brand new bike. So what the children are learning, that good things do not come from mom and dad. They come from strangers. And we call that compassion. That is not compassion. That's a substitute to compassion. Imagine I'm a poor person. The government gives me housing, food stamps, welfare. The church gives me clothing. The nonprofit gives me more clothing and food. You know, they give me the school supplies for kids when the schools are coming. Turkeys are flying all over the place during Thanksgiving. And someone gives me the gifts for Christmas. Why bother get out of poverty? Why get out of poverty? Poverty starts looking mighty nice. You know? So, in other words, we incentivize poverty by not challenging people. You get out of a condition when that condition becomes uncomfortable. You know how it used to be, Christians used to do before the government got in the way? If you used to go to a homeless shelter, they will not help you if you were able-bodied. They will give you an axe. Go and cut some wood out there. And when you have worked and you have demonstrated that you are willing to do something for what you are going to receive, then they will help you. They will teach a lesson in hard work, in self-reliance, and you will chop wood for those who were disabled and could not chop wood. So you gave to others first. You demonstrated your capacities and your willingness, and then you were helped. But now what we do? Well, you go to a homeless shelter and it looks like the Ritz carton. Well, why should I will stay in the shelter forever. You can go to many homeless shelters and you're not even asked to clean after yourself. And we call that compassion. So when I'm watching the TV and I felt so degraded, and I said, there has to be a better way to do this, and that's where the Self-Reliance Club came. Now we are in 15 schools in Southwest Florida, mostly minority kids. We open savings accounts in different banks to those kids. They work on an entrepreneurial initiatives, urban farming and other. They and their parents get financial education, business, bonds, stocks, all this good stuff, that makes the economy work. So the kids are learning the economy to be in the game of the economy, instead of on the outside looking in and protesting because we are not there. That's what we do. We are very good in protesting. And what happens? They're earning money as they work. We pay them for their work. By the end of the school year, they can earn enough to buy their own school supplies. So the need is met. There is a great need for school supplies, but they have made it themselves. And they have learned that they have what it takes to get out of poverty on their own. So what we become? We don't become the ones who make it for them. We become witnesses to their own capacity. We become witnesses. We can testify to the reality that these kids can make it and are making it. The need is met, but in a totally different way. That is the way that the Christian compassion should be lived in America. So that is the Self-Reliance Club. The fifth criteria, freedom, economic initiative over aid. You cannot help the poor by hurting the rich. Learn that very well, because in this country today, that's not what we are hearing. Let's just stick it to the rich. No, that's what we are hearing. No, they have too much stuff. We have to take some of their stuff and put it in our pockets. No, we call them greedy, but we don't call ourselves envious, because that's what we are when we do that. Envy is the sin of the poor, and while greed is the sin of the rich. That's basically the reality. So we cannot help the poor by hurting the rich, because many times the poor depend on the jobs that the rich create. And if I am rich, I have what? Resources. I know how to hide my money. People say, we're going to increase the taxes of corporations. They know how to manage it. They have all kinds of CPAs and experts that tell them how to do it right. I went to Puerto Rico a few years ago, and they put a 7%, they call it the IBU. It's a new tax to make corporations pay their fair share. And I go, and in Puerto Rico, an ice cream used to cost $1. I with my two children, and they tell me it's $3.21. I said, $3.21? That doesn't sound right. Puerto Rico was only 50 cents or $1, something like that. And I asked the clerk, $3.21? Why 21? We have a new tax on corporations, and that's why it's $3.21. In other words, who was paying the taxes? Huh? I was paying the taxes. You didn't hurt the store. You hurt the consumer. And what happens? Who's counting the scoops? Nobody. So the guy can take the money, put it in his pocket, and I give him more money. No one is counting how many scoops of ice cream he's distributing. So every time you try to hurt the rich, eventually you hurt the poor. Because corporations just pass whatever taxes they had to pay now, pass it to you as a consumer, and you end up paying more taxes without realizing that you are doing it. It's a good trick. So freedom is what brings wealth. When you incentivize economic freedom, you get more free people. When you incentivize work, you get more working people. When you give more weeks of unemployment, what you get? More unemployed people. If you give me that, before I had 30 hours, 30 weeks for unemployment, I stay home 30 weeks, you know, and in week 28, I started looking for a job. And now it's 90 weeks. What do you think I'm gonna do? I'm gonna spend a couple of years at home, watching TV, and you pay for me. And close to the 90 weeks, then I start looking for a job. So we are incentivizing the very conditions we are trying to fix. And we call that a compassionate and just society. Number 6, realism over utopia. We need to stop this idea that we can end poverty. No one is going to end poverty, okay? You have to stop. If you say that you can end poverty, you are calling Jesus Christ a liar, because he said that the poor will always be with us, no? He said that. So you need to forget that about ending poverty. You have to create the incentives for economic activity. And you can do that one person at a time. When you go to a nonprofit or you are going to work with the poor, always think about this. I'm here to incentivize something positive and beautiful and good in that person that I'm with. I am not here to be the nanny of that person. I'm not here for myself to feel good about what I'm doing. I'm here for that person. How can I help awaken the dignity of that person so that person begins to see himself as the most efficient instrument of his own development? Whenever you do that, you are helping the poor. When you don't do that, you are hurting the poor while thinking that you're helping the poor. So we are not utopians. We live in the here and now with our feet on the ground, even though we have an expectation of a world to come. But that world to come will remain unrealized here on earth. That was my mistake as a socialist. I really believe that it has this power, you know. I could go out there and just change the world. That is why socialism is so difficult to kill. You know, it's a kind of dream that every time we fail, we still try again because it will happen one day. And what happens? To find that dream, sometimes you have to dig through a whole lot of corpses. And history is filled with the corpses, the human carcass of that the utopians have left behind. And finally, the most important thing, God. You know, you cannot, if it is true that the human person has a spiritual reality to himself, how can you pretend to help the poor while forgetting that reality? And that is why we have to be so careful when we try to have unequal yokes with the state, with a godless state. We have to be very careful. We have to start telling Pharaoh to keep his money. Tell Pharaoh, keep your money. We don't want it. We will do what is our task as Christians with whatever resources we have. And I am convinced that if our bishops will take that courageous stance, money will pour from the pockets of Catholics, because they will see their commitment and their integrity. And you will see a renewal in Catholic social justice when we say, we don't want your money. We don't need your money. We are going to do it, and we're going to take care of the poor on our own. I encourage you as young people to go out there and respect people and fight for people's dignity and freedom. That's what is your task. Fight for their freedom from the clutches of race consciousness, the freedom from their clutches of social structures that tell them that they are the enemies of each other, the poor the enemy of the rich, whites the enemies of blacks, and freedom from the clutches of government dependency. When you do that, we will begin to live authentic social justice. Thank you.